Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. While 2022 may be firmly behind us, we are not out of the energy crisis yet. In order to accelerate the growth of green energy, Europe requires massive investments into wind and solar, for instance. But will interventions into the continent's wholesale energy markets scare off investors? And what kind of long-term changes to market design can we expect to see from the European Commission? Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss these issues and much, much more is Kristian, Secretary General of Eurelectric. A warm welcome to you, Kristian, and welcome back to the pod.
Thanks.
I'd like to start off really by talking about 2022. It was quite an unprecedented, bit of a crazy year. How would you evaluate the past 12 months, Kristian? Well, the year just gone.
Yeah, it was definitely unprecedented, and it was definitely also quite crazy. I've been, of course, presenting a lot and giving a lot of analysis and thoughts about what was going on, and what was just so stunning was the level of pretty much everything. Most importantly, perhaps the level of complexity that we've seen. We already had a quite complex situation in the energy sector, a massive systemic transformation going on, lots of different challenges, COVID just behind us. But this then with, of course, the unprecedented price levels, the unprecedented amount of political interventions has just, taken things to a completely new level of complexity.
Did anything surprise you?
Well, I got to be honest and say that the Russian invasion of Ukraine did surprise me. I think in hindsight, and if people had been looking closer, maybe we should have been better at seeing the signs of that coming on. But it did surprise me that it took this shape that it did. And from there on, well, I think we've seen the consequences of that, none of which we could have predicted since we didn't predict the invasion in the first place. But I would say that even if we disagree with a lot of what policymakers have been doing, there's also been an honest attempt at doing the right thing. It's just when things have to happen this fast, you inevitably make some mistakes, and that's basically where we're at today.
I'd like to return to those issues a bit later on, Kristian. But if I can start by, or can follow up on 2023, are we now out of the woods? I mean, are we, is the energy crisis over now, or are we still in the middle of it, would you say?
We're definitely still in the middle of it. I think what we're experiencing right now is a very welcome hiatus. We're seeing a little bit of, steam go out of the prices because we have better weather than we had anticipated. We've been able to bring back online some capacity also in the power sector, and some of the emergency interventions are starting to kick in. And here I'm especially thinking about the energy efficiency measures that were put out by the Commission. So we are in a slightly better situation now than I had dared hope for, but we're by no means out of the woods yet. And my focus is very much on making sure that we don't have a critical situation next winter.
And what needs to happen to ensure that doesn't happen then, Kristian?
Well, we need to get the policies going to allow for increased deployment of renewables. We need to take more seriously energy savings and energy efficiency. And then we need to make sure that we don't mess up the entire investment environment. And there's a real risk of that. So those would be the key points I'd make here.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned the unprecedented market interventions. I mean, the intention there is obviously to shield energy users, both households and industrials, from these very, very high prices. But what's your evaluation of the policies that have come both at national and at EU level, Kristian?
Well, as I said, when we're acting in the midst of a war situation, and there is a war, the EU is not directly involved, but we're supporting one part in a very, very brutal, ferocious war that's going on right in the, let's say, in the back garden of the EU. And in such a situation, speed is of essence, and therefore policymakers are acting with speed and also making some mistakes inevitably. I would say, if we take the big chunks here, the Repower EU was an honest attempt at saying, how do we deal with such a situation? How do we get ourselves weaned off our dependence on fossil fuels from Russia before 2030? The plan, as it's been laid out, is extremely ambitious. And, just to look at one indicator, we're basically roughly around half the pace of renewable deployment that we should be in order to deliver on this plan. So it is extremely ambitious. It's also the right direction, by and large, I would say, with accelerated renewables, accelerated electrification. In my view, there's too much focus on hydrogen, which is not energy efficient and hence potentially dangerous in such a situation. But okay, so be it. We also need the hydrogen, but perhaps a bit for later rather than here and now. So the Repower EU, I would say check. Then we had the power market intervention, where I feel that this was really done too much in a rush. On the one hand, I understand the political intention of saying we need to avoid that we pass through absolutely crazy prices to customers, or at least that we offset absolutely crazy prices, and that people don't, let's say, cash in war dividends. What, in my view, is misunderstood about the whole thing is that who is cashing in war dividend right now? That's oil and gas. It's not electricity. We have a gas problem and we mess up the electricity market. That's what concerns me and bothers me around the entire power market intervention we did. And then the last piece that we've been calling for a long time, an intervention to basically avoid, you could say, war dividend in the gas sector. We saw finally, after a lot of discussions, I think it was on the 19th of December that they passed this emergency intervention against runaway gas prices. I would say it was better than what was initially tabled by the Commission, but it's still a proposal that will not make a difference for what matters to us, which is power prices. The level they cap the gas prices at is so high that it's not going to have any effective positive impact on how prices are formed in the power sector.
How about the windfall taxes on utilities? What's your view here, Kristian?
Well, so the windfall taxes was the second piece I was talking about, which was this power market intervention where they set a revenue on caps. The fundamental issue here is that it does not change prices, but it basically sets a cap on how much an individual generator can earn, depending on which technology he's operating. What that does is that it creates some very, very serious distortions in the market. And what it also does is that it basically rips apart the member state level from the EU level, because the regulation as it ended up said, well, you need to do something at EU level, which is the 180 cap. And apart from that, anybody can do anything they want. So essentially, you're institutionalizing a huge fragmentation with that piece of emergency legislation. So it's concerning, and it's concerning that it might stay.
So you think it might stay longer than, it might just be a temporary blip, but could be extended for several years, do you think?
Well, that's the concern we have, because there is a sunset clause in there, and there is the idea that there's a possibility to extend it as a emergency measure. But more concerningly, we're seeing discussions, thoughts expressed by the Commission to basically install this kind of thinking in the structural market reform that they're considering right now.
Do you find that the Commission listens to your views here, Kristian? They've taken on some of the measures that are proposed from France and Spain in regards to the gas prices and the way that the wholesale price is set. But do you find that they are open to hear your views and from that of the utility sector, the electricity sector?
Well, I think, as I said, when you're doing emergency legislation, I think it's fair enough to act in the context of an emergency. I think when it comes to whether the commission is truly listening to the industry or not, the proof is still in the pudding, and that's going to be, let's say, the structural market review. If they do not listen to the industry here, they will do so at their peril. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because what's really at stake here is the energy transition that is something that's dear to my heart, but definitely also a very, very prominent political project in the EU. And you just have to be honest and say that project will go nowhere without investors, right? You cannot create a state-controlled energy transition. You cannot see states hire thousands of engineers to build wind turbines. You need to work with private companies. And if you destroy the investment environment, you're not going to succeed with the energy transition, full stop.
And you think that's what's happening here, is that investors are being scared away from the policy measures at both EU and national levels?
Well, as I said, the proof is still in the pudding. The jury is out on this, right? If they mess up the structural reform of the electricity market, I'm convinced that investors will be scared away.
We've got these kind of short-term temporary interventions, but at the same time, we are, the European Commission is preparing a more long-term market design. I mean, what are your hopes or fears even for such a market design, Kristian?
My primary fear is that it is being led by political panic. Look at how prices have evolved now. We're seeing power prices, day-ahead prices, 60, 70, 80 euros across the continent. Does that really merit a fundamental overhaul where you throw all the old rules out the window? Absolutely not. And what we are seeing from the Commission, which is very concerning, is that they're saying we don't have time to do an impact assessment. This is a huge deviation from the way that the Commission is supposed to work, right? They're supposed to find out what will happen if we make this legislation. And they're saying, well, we don't have time for that. That is dangerous. The next thing is that, right now we have a whole bunch of ideas flying around, but fundamentally, if you don't assess them, if you don't find out what is the impact of what you plan to do, that comes with a whole bunch of risks. Some of the ideas that we're hearing about, we like, frankly, and it's something that we've been saying time and again, long-term investment signals. We do think a majority of people in the sector think that the short-term market is insufficient in terms of investment signal to plan 20, 30, 40 years investments. So long-term investment signals is a good thing. And this is something that has been sort of taken on. Then some of the other ideas that are flying around, like essentially expropriating hydro and nuclear plants and making huge retroactive changes as being proposed by the Spaniards. Well, again, that's just the recipe for disaster. So there's a very sort of fateful moment right now where things can go terribly wrong and things can work out quite well.
But you're saying the market's not broken, so does it need any tweaks at all, would you say, Kristian?
Yeah, we're saying the market is not broken, but it's not perfect either. That goes with any sort of regulatory framework. You need to continuously look at it, review it, and see what needs improvement. But we're taking an approach where we're saying we need an evolution rather than a revolution. Evolution is good because we need to make sure that we continue to attract those 80 to 100 billion euros of annual investments in order to deliver on the transition. If we get a radical disruption in the medium and long term, and we already have in the immediate term a disruption through the emergency legislation, I mean, why would investors throw a whole bunch of money at this sector? Why would they not just go to the US where they have the Inflation Reduction Act or go to Asia or other places? We need to be honest and frank about the fact that you really can scare off investors with a lot of regulatory uncertainty and a lot of retroactive changes.
And what about the marginal pricing model? Do you think that needs changing?
Well, we think that the marginal pricing model is very, very good for dispatch. Basically, what that does is it says which plant can produce the cheapest megawatt hour tomorrow. That's a great tool, and we need that. But in order to get gigantic investments going in storage, get big investments going in backup plants that won't be running a lot of time, in order to get investments going in unprecedented amounts of renewables, we also need longer term investment signals. We've been saying this over and over for years. And I mean, look at where things get built and why things get built. People build a lot of offshore wind because they're very clear contracts for difference that back that up. People build where they see a very clear and well-defined remuneration and return on their investment. And that's the fundamental principle that we think should be honored and respected in a reform, and it can frankly improve. We also think that, you know, in this situation, we've seen that, you know, as strong as the short-term market is for dispatch, it is also a mechanism that is vulnerable if someone makes a very deliberate attempt at disrupting the European energy supply. And this is what we're facing today. And from a political perspective, it's fair to say, you know, we don't want another Putin to be able to, you know, reach into the pockets of European citizens in the future. So how do we make this system more robust? And we think that the solution to that is to provide a better choice of long-term and short-term signals in the end-use customer bill. That would basically give people a better choice of how exposed they are and empower the customer more than they are today.
So what you mentioned hydrogen or green hydrogen, Kristian. What are your concerns here?
Well, it's a very practical matter, frankly. Well, we all know that hydrogen will be needed for the transition in places where direct electrification won't cut it, right? So we need to create carbon neutral hydrocarbons, frankly. We need to create energy carriers that can power maritime transport, airplanes, and the like. We also know that every time you produce a unit of hydrogen, you are using a lot of energy for that. You're losing actually 40% of the energy that you put into an electrolyzer right up front. And then afterwards, you have a lot of challenges about how that's going to be transported around. So whereas hydrogen is essential, it is also something that's very valuable and quite expensive, frankly. So we need to think very carefully about where we use it, how we use it. And very practically speaking, I mean, in a situation where we need to ramp up the use of renewables, the use of heat pumps, roll out a completely new transport system for passenger cars, we are also taking some resource away by building a hydrogen bank and stuff like that. At least that's what I hear concerns about inside the commission, that there really is a gigantic focus on hydrogen, whereas we actually also need, or we're short of off-takers for hydrogen for the moment. We're still building this. It takes time. It is not a crisis tool. It is a medium and long-term tool.
It's not exactly that magic potion that will sort of work its wonders. But what is there also a danger here, Kristian, in this period we're in now of locking ourselves into fossil fuels? You know, you're talking, you know, long-term LNG contracts. You know, coal-fired plants are back now operating fully. Is this a concern?
There's definitely a risk of lock-in, and as I said, the complexity has risen to new levels because, I mean, we did see, you know, Russia as a partner for the transition to provide, you know, reasonably priced natural gas as a transition fuel, but it is just irresponsible to put any trust in Russia today, and therefore I am fully supportive of the idea of really you know, weaning ourselves off any supply of Russia as soon as possible. But that still leaves the question, how the heck are we then going to power Europe's citizens and Europe's industries? And it has confronted us very clearly with this situation that we are really dependent on trading partners for a lot of our energy, and we probably need to change that. So what can we do here to avoid that energy independence becomes a lock-in on fossil fuels? First of all, we need to revisit the whole issue of energy savings, energy efficiency. We need to take a much more ambitious approach to this. We all have these experiences all the time for the moment. You know, you fly over Europe and all the lights are on, and you're like, okay, what energy crisis? Or you know, you go to the local swimming pool and all the saunas are on still, and you're like, how is this possible if we really have this gigantic crisis? So we need to revisit the way that we use energy in society, and we need to use a lot less of it. We need to look at what kind of industrial base we want to have in Europe and see how we can make sure that that industry actually thrives, because a lot of the industry we have today really needs a lot of energy. So how do we, let's say, first of all, save energy wherever we can? Secondly, how do we, let's say, share energy between those different uses that we have in society, those needs we have in society, competitiveness, the daily use of energy for all kinds of purposes, the powering of hospital and fundamental functions of society. There is a debate that will come here. And then again, we also, of course, have this question, how the heck do we now, let's say, speed up to really reach the pace that has been set out in the plans we have? How do we match that with action on the ground? Because that's not happening for the moment.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question there, Kristian. Is like, I mean, it's been very impressive the way Europe has, over the course of 8 to 10 months, replaced Russian gas. But what would you like to see in terms of accelerating the energy transition? What needs to be done to green Europe and to wean ourselves off these fossil fuels?
Well, you know what? I think that we now have a lot of legislation in place at EU level. We still need to sort of close all the dossiers that are part of the Fit for 55 package, because that really sets a good framework for all the things that need to happen. But specifically about renewable deployment, which remains a major challenge. I think last year we were successful in deploying some 15 gigawatts of wind energy in Europe. Well, it should have been double, you know? So, I mean, how do we get that going? I don't think it's as much about EU policy anymore as it is about member state policy, member state will to do it, and also local municipalities, regions, that they get their act together now, that we get the zones defined as have been laid out in the renewable directive, those go-to zones, that we get stuff done on the ground, that we do not allow, or that we remove the obstacles that are in the way of the actual construction of the projects.
Is permitting still an issue, Kristian? I mean, you know, the local opposition to wind farms specifically, is that still a problem?
I want to give credit to the Commission for all the work that's been done to speed up permitting. There are new provisions in the Renewable Energy Directive that are really helpful in my view, and there's also a new set of emergency measures that are good. We still have a backlog, if you will, that pertains to existing projects. How do we get those going? They're not, let's say, covered by any of those two legislative elements I was talking about. So there's still a bit of homework, but where the real sort of challenge with permitting lies today is that we need to see that legislation now be respected, okay? Because you know, I know developers that are, you know, really interested to build big solar plants, for instance, and they're still talking to the municipality. It doesn't really seem that the municipality has realized that a lot of legislation has been passed at EU level. They're still like, yeah, we're considering it, and there is this other piece of legislation that stands in the way. You can't build here, you can't build there, blah, 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 blah. And this is the kind of bureaucracy, this is the kind of complacency we need to do away with once and for all. Otherwise, we're just not going to get there.
Kristian, I think you probably got a very busy year ahead of you. But thanks very much for finding time to join us on the podcast this week.
My pleasure.
So, listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.